And we are live. Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining. My name is Jeff Rock, and welcome to another D. Hilton Associates webinar. Today, we're going to be talking about 5 surprisingly good news stories of 2020. And first, we just want to kind of set the stage. We in no way want to diminish the gravity of what we've been going through this time. People's lives have changed and lives have been lost. But we want to just kind of focus on some of the things that we've done well in business, look at how that's kind of changed and transitioned through this time, and then how we can leverage that moving forward. But first, let's talk about a couple of administrative items. We're going to be recording this webinar, so if you do miss something, please go to our website at dhilton.com. You'll find a recording of this video in about 3 to 5 days. You can also pick up any of the ones that you've missed in the past. A lot of great content there. If you have any questions through this, please feel free to use the Q&A section. We'll try to leave about 10 to 15 minutes at the end of this presentation to go through questions, but if we see something pop in, we might be able to answer it on the fly. Also, after the webinar, you'll receive a survey in your email. If you would please take the time to go ahead and fill that out. Just takes a couple moments, tells us how we're doing, some of the topics you might want to talk about, lets us know what you like, what you dislike, and helps to guide the direction from there. So without further ado, joining me in the booth today, I have John Andrews. How are you, John?
Doing good. Good to see you.
Yeah, it's good to see you as well. Thank you for taking the time to come in.
Literally seeing.
Safe distance away, 6 feet away, but I can see you, so we're in good shape there. So, John, without further ado, I'll go ahead and hand it over to you. Let's take us through some surprisingly good news stories for 2020.
Okay. Thanks, Jeff. What we wanted to visit today about was simply some of the trends that we're seeing. I think one of the number one weaknesses we see in credit unions sometimes is closing the loop strategically. So we're definitely good at addressing situations, reacting to what needs to be done, and we just thrive this year on that. But, sometimes when we get to, take our boots off and look how it went, it's a good time to kind of reassess. So that's kind of what today is. By no means do we think it's over. And quite frankly, I had a client tell me, everybody thought January 1st, everything was, magically going back to, whatever normal was.
The quote unquote, the way things were.
But really, it was the 13th month of 2020, and February is no different. Well, welcome to month 14, right?
December 31st, I see you. December 37th, I see you, 2020.
So with that said, 5 things we're going to walk through today on the screen of how we really delivered for our membership, how the digital delivery has really progressed nicely, how decision-making kind of changed or pivoted last year, and what does the virtualized workplace look like? How is it settled yet? And probably where we'd like to spend most of our time is just how are we going to retool some of our reward and recognition programs for this new working model we're coming out of, or going into, I should say. There is no question that we walk the walk. Our clients would not have had double-digit deposit growth if people didn't think we were safe and sound. And so when you look at our brands, when you look at what we trumpet, what we hold dear to ourselves, we were safe and sound, and people took us up on it. Mm-hmm. And we wish they didn't take it to such robustness, but they did. And, to our credit, we didn't chase a lot of money away. We weren't punitive on rates or punitive on product design. We said, bring it on, and it's sticking, and this is without stimulus 3 or stimulus 4, whatever's going to come. So as we plan for the year, I think boards need to recognize that, the management teams definitely did walk the walk. And there's no question, I had in the middle of last year talking about this, there's no doubt that not just CEOs, but everybody from our tellers and member service reps all the way up to our board members worked harder than ever, mm-hmm. working without certainty of information to make key decisions, and for as little financial success as it looked on paper. Some of us had our best years ever, and some of us, because of just deposit growth, there was dilution and things like that. But, the most important thing is you ask every CEO, it was probably the most rewarding year of their career. Mm-hmm. They got to show leadership. They got to see people rise to the occasion. And it was very, very impressive to see from and very proud to be part of the industry, quite frankly.
Absolutely.
So what made it special? Very simple. We transitioned to work from home. I mean, we were scouring for terminals and mouses and, where are we going to put the kids? And really it was seamless to the membership. I think, if we overcome that initial phase that we were going to do it, we did it. We just thrived. We kept our employees safe. We kept the branches safe. We kept members safe. We figured out how to keep that delivering. And more importantly, we walked the walk of keeping member access, to their products and services. And people will remember that.
And it was a vital component to the communities. They found that safe place. They found that refuge, and they were able to bring it there, and we were able to step up to that call.
Yeah, so you guys in New York State were some of the toughest hit in so many, so much context. But when you look at it, there was mandated you had to modify loans. You couldn't charge fees. You couldn't do the normal things you do to run your business. Any ratio that had deposits in the denominator, grew and was diluted. So, we recognized how we overcame that. And I showed this chart in the fall, but I want to kind of use it in a different context today is, when you look, here's a case study is, in the top, we thought, this is how the year would progress. And I start at the bottom where, the loan revenue wasn't there. The expenses were different. Our just everything we forecasted wasn't right. Come up with a $2.1 million bottom line and a 0.28 ROA, way off the target. But then if you actually delve beneath the numbers of what you did and you said, really that was a 0.9 ROA if we, kind of manage some of those expectations of the true impact of the year. So what I'm encouraging people to do is just don't do your financials and move on. That's the accounting perspective. But from the 30,000 foot to strategic level, close the loop. Educate your employees about what you did to be successful. Because this is not the last financial / medical crisis we're going to have to deal with.
A once in a lifetime one?
Well, I'm on 5.
Yep.
David Hilton's on 6. You're on few.
Yeah.
So when we look at it that way, make sure our employees understand that, because when they become leaders, this is just a great body of knowledge to have stored in that bank someplace so they can put it in perspective. The next place is think about the annual report. We always, whether you do an elaborate or just a couple of sheets, make sure the narrative is, how many people did you help this year? How many in the community, you were able to reach out and keep that car running or keep the roof over their head or, get supplies so they could, teach their kids kids at home. That's a great narrative for annual reports. And if we don't do that, we're not walking the walk of that, what it means to be a cooperative.
And those stories are wildly impactful for the employees, and because
everyone,
they feel what
everyone
they did.
has that story out there. But we gotta bring it personalized, because $1 million, $1 billion, those are numbers. But when we but really who we serve is that person and that family, and that's what we have to connect with.
Knowing what they did on a day-to-day basis really changed somebody's life and helped out for the better. That's motivation. That's inspiration.
And then also strategic planning. When I talked about close the loop earlier, this idea of why don't you budget sometimes during your cycle? It's not the traditional strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, threats, but it also is just that reassessment of what we did. And again, if for our folks that didn't see this, here's just an example of how net worth could have been impacted by results last year. In our second kind of component today, we wanted to talk about digital delivery and how that was embraced, and also the surprising impact of mortgage. It's not a secret. I mean, on the mortgage
was busy.
side, well, tad. But when we did check-ins with our clients in June and July of 20, we were saying, "How's it going?" And they were saying, "A little cautiously optimistic. We've already hit our mortgage goal for the year." And then it kept blowing and going. So we had that in our back pocket. But think about that strategically. Or for any organization that says, "Oh, here's where we need to be helping our membership," and then, okay, let's go put a mortgage program or find a third party. You really had to have that humming well to take advantage of this, or you just missed the boat totally. So that was impressive. So one of the things, we do a lot of strategic planning, and we love to look at consumer behavior, member behavior. So there's no question that digital delivery is here to stay. The adoption rates were unbelievable between all demographic segments. This was an interesting study that Bain did, and this year came out, said if a and this we're going to say customer consumer here because this is not a credit union study, but it has a lot of relevance. If you started as a consumer in the digital channel and ended in the digital channel, look what their net promoter score jumped. It's 25 points, between where you start and end. So think about that person predisposed to be digital great, trying it for the first time, getting it done on their own, the self-confidence to do it or the expectation to do it. That was our biggest jump. Now, when a consumer wanted to do something through a human channel and then ended at a human channel, it's kind of flat, and that's fine. I mean, it's we need a context for that other than it didn't slip. So that doesn't mean like, people are up in arms that if you don't have a digital channel, we're upset. It just means if I choose to do it this way, great.
It met expectations because they're somewhat used to that type of delivery.
And this data really kind of moves towards the complaints and fix my problem kind of stuff. But what was interesting is if you started in the digital channel and then ended in a human channel, that got the highest net promoter score rate of the three scenarios. So if you think about that, it goes something I've been talking about since the 80s. No matter whether you're 50, 30, or 15, you still want to talk to people about your money. And you need to have whether we do a chat or we do bots or we do contact centers or we do one-on-one, it still seems to be the one that people feel comfortable with. So I have my daughters in the 20s. Your kids are not. But as they grow up and you say, you need to save for retirement, you know what they're going to do, Jeff?
I'm waiting.
They're going to say, Uncle John, what should we do? They're not going to be talking to you. But you just wait for that moment that when your kid gets that first job and says, they have this 401k match, Dad, what should I do? And you go, oh, okay.
Here's a softball.
Let's go with that one. But you think about, bring that into the credit union, the retail context now, and think about it. People want to talk about their money. So, even a 20-year-old, hey, I'm thinking about doing this. What should I do? So as we go, it's going to be a balanced approach moving forward. But I love this chart, and I think they'll be updating this as they go because this is definitely a migration of how we do this.
Yeah.
Now, as comp professionals, one of our challenges always is who gets credit for what, right? Who got credit for the sale? Who got credit for fulfillment? Who got credit for error? And with this omni-channel approach that we're all moving toward, it starts digital, ends human. It's starts human, ends digital. We're gonna have to be very careful of how we reward and recognize that. And in fact,
touching how many hands and how many processes along the way.
Yeah, and we're building it as one-stop shopping, and it's seamless, and it's got to be. But really, behind the scenes, it's going to be a lot more touch points than people might think. We still believe branches will be anchors to our business. When you look at people that come out, this was done, I think, in the fall of 20, and it says 54% of consumers still won't consider a financial institution unless there's a physical branch, and only 3% are digital only. And that skews to our younger folks, obviously. But that's a lot of ground to cover. Will we cover it? I don't know, but that's something we have to monitor. So as you get into strategic planning, the idea is like, we got to look at footprint of branches, how we set it up, how's that contact center going to support, how's the digital going to support everything. And, that's going to make us a viable organization if we can start having those discussions. And again, continue with that same study that was done by Simon Kucher. They looked at different products and they said, what would you prefer? And the mortgage app is still 69%. And even though you think about, all the stuff that's, iPhone apps and digital things to get you in the door, but what do? They send you right to a human being to walk you through your papers and things. So, that's the highest. Dispute a fee, 4 out of 10. But, that the blocking and tackling the basic accounts, the in-person wasn't as important. And there was a correlation there. The bigger the amount of money you're bringing in your brown paper bag, the more
important in the bag of your head. I'm going to hand this to somebody.
But to me, the most interesting factoid that came out of this study was how far people are willing to drive. 16 minutes in some towns could be, across county, and some metropolitan areas that could be the next exit. But going from 16 to 27 minutes says that people still want to talk to people about their money. So that was an interesting one. And then on digital options, if they're not world class, and that's what's our challenge is. We're not going up against Bank of America or Wells Fargo. We're going up against, Apple, and Facebook, and all of those heavy hitters are in that space. That's who the context of how we do comparison.
Mm-hmm.
And so are people completely satisfied with the digital? Look at banks, credit unions, and regionals. That's all pretty darn close, plus or minus 5%. As a statistician, I'm okay with that. But when you look at digital, they only have 53%. They got room to get better too. So if you think about it as, I'm a 20-something, I'm going to be a digital-only person, and I want that to be, and they're going to hold those folks to higher standards. And so guess what comes next? We get the same. We're going to be held to the highest standards too.
And yeah, the expectation kind of trickles down of, hey, I had this digital-only bank. Here was the offerings that they had. Why aren't you offering the same type of thing?
Yeah. And I just see that as we get into planning, making sure that we, assess the risk there about how we configure coming out of COVID.
Yeah, I'd be willing to bet that there's an age skew kind of thing happening with the digital banks as well. You see younger individuals are going to be kind of focusing on that, but they're going to continue to want things as well as they expand outward from just that digital only.
Exactly. So from MasterCard, one of the stats that I thought was really interesting is says, like, are you using, your contactless card more? And it's up 54%. But they're doing it because of safety and cleanliness, and it's 79% is the reason by. And then I don't, to a degree, this might be a self-serving statistic, but they're predicting like a 3x increase in transactions in the next 5 years, and I think we'll get better at that. And I think it's something that we need to take into consideration as we plan. And as we talk about the mortgages, flat, and then, oh my gosh, what happened? And then you got like third quarter numbers that
just pretty much came in, that kind of deal. So even when we're looking at this, we've got this nice chart that kind of goes, fits the range, but then we look at the third quarter results that just essentially came out, and the refinances continue to dominate, and it's going up to $735 billion. So in the third quarter, it literally is going off of this chart that we have here, because we stop at 700, it's going to 735. That's how much has actually happened in that amount of time. The consumer demand continued pushing retail operations, which accounted for about 64.5% of originations. And the top retail was Quicken Loans again, pulling in, $146.99 billion. I mean, it's just absolutely ridiculous. It's crazy how much this mortgage department has gone off. And that is certainly a bright spot in all of this that did anybody even remotely expect this to happen?
Well, it was coming, and it tracks with rates, and rates have been obviously favorable. So people are, all paying attention to that. From the compensation perspective, it can be such a mercenary business that, if you need underwriters and processors and such, they're writing some blank checks to get, the folks in the door to get the processing done. I think if you look at, credit unions where some of their fields of membership might have been really struggling, but when you look at seats they needed to fill, mortgages, IT, we're definitely in this year. Guess what? I don't think that trails off by any means. So if we look at our next topic that we wanted to look at is just about how decision making was done in 2020 and how the boards measured leadership under crisis. It came so fast, and when you look at leaders that are good, it's so easy to be a Monday morning quarterback. Oh, we should have done that. That was obvious, but we were working with such little information, and in some states where it was mandated, we couldn't do this, that, and the other. In some states, do whatever you want. And, we had to make decisions. But, one of the key things, and we'll talk about in a second, is like CEOs, take a breath. Don't do 10 things this afternoon because of what might happen. If you take a step back, sometimes it's clearer. And so when you look at this, postponing decisions for the right information, sometimes people wait forever and it passes us by.
Analysis paralysis.
Yeah. So when you look, this goes back to business 101. Two cardinal sins businesses typically commit in a crisis or in a panic situation is they stop marketing and they kind of shut down their HR practices. No training, no raises, no.
It's the easiest thing to cut is what it comes down to.
It's a line item.
Yeah.
But what we see is the credit unions that thrive this year, guess what they didn't do? they doubled down on marketing. They let their members know that they were here. So when some institutions were really getting tight on credit, guess what? We were walking the walk again. I guess if that was a drinking game, I said it like 15 times already. Yeah, sorry about that, guys.
Yeah.
Come up with some new words. But if we looked at it this way, we were there and we doubled down in those areas. I asked all of my clients in the first quarter of 20, are you going to shut down your incentive plan? Are you going to freeze wages? And less than 5% said yes. And then as it got closer to mid-year, most everybody kind of opened up again saying, oh, we're cautiously optimistic. And then at the end of the year, it was like the best thing we ever did was not to do.
Absolutely.
Your employees will remember this forever, that you took care of them, right?
Yep.
And then we see the year-end recognition programs to say thank you for your service. Thanks for, doing the more juggling than you ever have before. That's going to pay off in kind of employee engagement, and board members are going to be able to look at their management teams and see that next generation of leader, who comes out of this. So there's so many things that were positive out of this under some really lousy situations. So kind of a quick mini tutorial, I guess, is to look at, and I'm not going to spend a lot of time in this, but, if you want to talk more about this, we're happy to do it offline. But when we're working with, our data says like a third of the $1 billion credit unions are going to change hands, CEO hands, in the next 3 years. And somewhere between 85% of them will be first-time CEOs. So you think about how many folks in 20 might have been their first opportunity to have to deal with some of this stuff. The coaching that the boards can do, or the CEO can do with their C-suite, is so important. So here's some just quick ideas. Make sure we use a balcony perspective. If you've come up through operations, we know you can fix a fire. But once you fix that one fire, and if you're not looking at the big perspective, guess what? It's going to be another fire, just down the street. So the idea is, if you can ask this question, what could we do now that pays off later? So the idea is that we're not going to stop marketing is a huge commitment. We're going to continue our variable pay practices to reward those people that are going to get us through this. Involve more people in the decision. Some people want to get in the Frady hole and shut the door and, get in the fetal position. You got to get out and get information. But you got to remember it's your vote. If you're CEO, it's going to come down to you. Get the information. This is not the time for consensus.
Mm-hmm.
If it was consensus in March, April, and May, you might have missed the boat.
It's the whole concept of the leader should speak last. Listen to all the options, understand it, take time to think about it, and then make a decision, move forward.
That's a great way to put it. And then, make the small choices that make up to a bigger picture. So as board members, one of the criticisms we got when we looked at leadership under crisis and we were given feedback to CEOs is sometimes we didn't get options. We said, here's what we're going to do. So one of the questions, next time this happens is for the board to say, if we go 6 months into the future, what could we do today to come out of this? And if you put that perspective, it becomes less firefighting and more, okay, this is just the way I need to kind of shift the strategic, execution.
It's that transition from managing by crisis to understanding there are going to be fires, but let's look at the whole thing and look at it from a big perspective.
Yeah. And then the fourth one is, making sure you have a nerve center, you have access to all the information, all the people you need, and use that as a command post to get things done. Every war the United States has fought, there's uncertainties and there's predictions and scenarios, but it ultimately comes down to that general that has to make the call. And that's what we wanted to see in leadership under crisis. And one of my favorite quotes that came out of this is, in wartime, you want a Churchill, not a Chamberlain. And so anybody under 30 or 40 or 50 maybe not know this, but it's the idea is Chamberlain was known as a consensus builder. So he would go all through before World War II trying to say, let's keep us out of this, let them do what they want to do. And unfortunately, that didn't work out well. Whereas Churchill was really, emphatic. Did he have all the information? Absolutely not.
But he used the best he had to drive a decision, and that was the course.
So, as we joke about going through 5 or 6, once in a lifetime crisis, the folks that are going through their first, we can check these things now. They've lived through a crisis and shown their resilience. Mm-hmm. That might be your next generation of leader. Mm-hmm. So we can identify folks, which was a good thing that came out of this. Yep. If you got to make tough and unpopular decisions, that will be more valued than just, waiting for the consensus. Hey, we all agreed to this. I'm sorry it didn't work. we're gonna rely on that.
Not my fault. You all agree to this.
Yeah.
But it basically, when it comes down to these critical things, you have the situations where, and I always kind of joke that leadership is a lot like oxygen. You don't truly appreciate it until there's not enough of it. And critical things like this really have a way of sucking the air out of the room. And having these leaders that are able to rise up, take a moment to slow the situation down, look at all the aspects, and then make a decision to move forward are critical. And those that achieved that through this really rose to the top. And those are the ones you should be planning for in the future.
So that's my point. Your last comment there is, as we do succession planning, as we go into strategic planning, please don't forget who came through for us.
Because we talked about in the past with that executive forecast there of how many executives are going to be available and what recruiting is going to be looking like. Internally, you're going to need to grow these individuals that have just proved themselves.
So those three things are what kind of those leadership characteristics we're going to look for in the future. And if you go 0 for 3, that's where the development plans. Can somebody learn this? Yeah, I would think, if we can work on it, and in the next one that they're willing to try different behaviors, great. But again, we need to look at where our leadership vacuum is that comes out of this. So what good comes out of a bad situation is we see who can rise to the top. Now, this is a D. Hilton statistic. So we take care of over 50 kind of executive scorecards or incentive plans around the country for variable pay purposes. And a lot of our clients looked at evaluating this concept of leadership under crisis. What did our leaders do to make us successful? And when we looked at the scores where all directors rated their individual CEOs, collectively, our industry got a 92.3 approval rating, meaning we really did shine as executives during this period. So, that's the CEO that's been there less than a year, the CEO that's been there 30 years. And so that was nice to see. Our industry did really, really well with that.
And it really speaks to the testament of that the leaders that we have in place were able to look at the situation, be agile, and move forward as they needed to.
So our next component was to look at the virtualized workplace and what we're going to have to do to make sure that everybody comes along with us, because there is kind of a mental health issue to this too. And that's something that we're not all equipped to deal with sometimes. We just expect people to show up, do their job, and go home. But as you know, as the new generations that we hire, it's work is a part of what defines them, not what defines them.
Absolutely. It's a completely different workforce and a completely different mentality when it comes in. We're not working or living to work, we're working to live, or vice versa when it comes down to it.
What are you doing, Jeff?
I'm living to work. I don't know. I don't think. I'm being fulfilled. That's my story, John.
Okay.
I like
All right. I'll stick. I'm okay with that. So what happens is what we really saw in 2020, and this is not just credit unions, this is all across, all industry sectors. Collaboration took a hit. I mean, if you have that really narrow scope job where it's self-contained and you just deliver, they give you inputs, you give outputs, and then you don't interact with anybody. Look at that. Were you more productive, less productive? That's what was interesting. So that self-contained, and I'm not going to stereotype any jobs. Everybody can insert their own, because as soon as I do that, it won't be.
Well, we have to accidentally offend one person at least every webinar, so you can.
I'm not. I want to wait a little longer.
Oh, okay, we got a little more time then.
I made it almost 30 minutes without, so I want to keep that going.
We've got a trend going.
And when you look at managerial tasks, it's the same thing. It's like, okay, if they stayed on site, their productivity was there. When they moved to remote, it was there, and then when they migrated to remote, it kind of in the same area. But when we got to collaborations, that's where we saw the hit. And when I look at, again, our omni channels, the transition of handoffs, those had to be more challenging in fulfillment of a basic member request. But when we go up higher in the organization, using to go down to talk to the marketing person or the finance person, and they're at home, and then we got to wait, that's what really took a hit. So as we move forward, we see some of the high tech companies really investing in collaboration software and really forcing, those play dates almost, like we're going to have to do some things socially to get us back on track to keep the culture.
And as one of the things we do have to continually focus on is that, I like how you put it, the care and feeding of the culture, to make sure that we are consistently checking in on that. We've built years, or spent years and years building this culture, so it is very important that we kind of maintain it. But it's going to transition. It's going to shift. It's not a matter of that the culture needs to look exactly like it did. Let's talk about what it's going to look like in the future and how do we grow it from there.
And Jeff, I want you to speak to this because it's one of your kind of areas of expertise, that social connectivity. Is if people had that and then moved remote, the collaboration stayed because the relationship stayed. If you didn't have that as a foundation, it really hurts you.
That's exactly right. Basically, the stronger the relationship was before the transition to the remote, it actually increased the communication, it increased the collaboration, it increased the relationship because you both knew you were going through something, but you're going through it together. But on the other side of that, if you had a weaker relationship, if you didn't have a good connection, that social interaction with either a team member or a manager, that fell off the cliff. And that's where I think we're starting to see that big differentiation between what the collaboration looks like, because those relationships kind of started falling by the wayside.
Well, in the old normal, it was classic for the best, teller to become branch manager. And then the worst thing for them was they had to tell their buddies, like, hey, you're not following the dress code, or
well, John, you were the worst.
Yeah, my dress code need some improvement, that's for sure. But in this one is, well, okay, I used to go to lunch, we went bowling, and now all that's out of the way. So that first line manager, I think the one that we probably left behind a little bit, that really needs to reinforce in 21 is, teaching them the skills and these new techniques to connect with their people. I mean, they're the branch manager because they're your culture. I mean, how many times have you heard, Sally is the epitome of what we stand for, but if she can't connect with her people and reinforce that, and we're doing it through a different channel, it could be challenging.
Absolutely.
So, those are the techniques that we, again, double down on training and coaching. Don't take it off the expense.
And it's not a matter of, talking about the weather anymore, because you used to be able to slide by those kind of half conversations. Now you actually have to ask them, how are you today? How are things going? Let's have an actual connection.
Exactly. So when we look at the 9 to 5 day.
The transition that we're having here, more and more companies are offering flexible options on both where a person works and when the person works. We're really more or less looking at a transition for not paying so much for somebody to come in, but paying for the professional service that they provide. And one of the examples and we'll kind of diminish or kind of talk about, hey, they're doing this, but it doesn't mean we have to do this. But it's kind of the transition that we're seeing in the future. Salesforce divided their their entire population into essentially 3 groups. One being flexible, where they're actually going to come in at some points in time during the week, maybe 1 to 3 days or something along that line as it's needed. Other than that, you're going to be working remotely. There's the group that's going to be working fully remote. It's exactly how it sounds. They're going to be working fully remote 100% of the time. And then there's also the office-based ones, in which, in this case for Salesforce, it was the smallest population, but they were going to be required to be in the office, working basically like they did in the past. This gave them the opportunity to kind of shrink their footprint as far as what they needed as offices, but also still bring in most of the company for a collaborative type of deal, because they would be there 1 to 3 days a week for that collaboration, keeping the culture there intact.
And, all well and good for thousands and thousands of an employee company, but when you move it to retail, when you move it to credit unions, we have, the multitasking, multi-hat wearing that's out there, it's a challenge.
It gets a lot harder.
But the point is, your employees are going to be exposed to this, whether it's in the press or they're going to have a friend or buddy that's saying this is a great place to work. So we have to prepare how we're going to maintain our culture, be accommodating, and still make sure the phone gets answered or the member's request gets done.
Because invariably, and we talk about the IT world here, and we'll kind of explain why we're talking about that, because those are the people you're still going to be hiring. You're
Absolutely.
going to be looking for those individuals as well.
So I got to give credit to my youngest daughter. She sent this article to me. It says, "This company looks awesome." And so I encourage everybody. We put the web address at the bottom there. Look at this. This is their corporate handbook that they put out there, and it really, I think it speaks to kind of the new generation of how people want to get treated, how we should treat people, and how if we set that culture, we're going to thrive as a company. So take that a look and give my daughter the credit. Now she's in finance with Mary Kay. So, I don't think she's going to jump ship anytime soon to go work for a startup in California, but it really resonated with her. So I'd encourage y'all to look at it too.
Well, to your point, as we talked about before, people see this. People are looking at this, even though it may not be her industry. She might be going, "That's a great idea."
Yeah.
And look for that in their next job or what they're doing on a day-to-day basis.
And I think the other thing is, she says, if she gives me information, then I won't tell stories about her. So,
there you go. I like
that's
it.
the big win. Everybody wins.
We're all missing stories about her, though. We haven't had a new one in a while.
I know. We'll get to her.
All right.
She's doing good.
The next webinar will coming up on that one.
But what's interesting is kind of the list of ideas here of what people are saying is, can you create some of that interaction, where we used to just assume it happens. So we're really going to have to, step up our game in those areas.
Yeah, and this kind of ties into a upcoming webinar. We're going to actually be talking about recognition programs in the virtual environment. So we'll kind of dig deeper into that in an upcoming webinar. So
we're actually going to do it at the end of the month. So
we're doing it at the end of the month. Okay, we're going to be doing another one at the end of the month.
So the two big things we're going to be talking about is employee recognition programs that other industries has done, but also kind of sharing some of the ideas that we've seen of how people reward and recognize their staff for 2020.
Mm-hmm.
And again, I can't stress it enough. If you want strong engagement scores, how you treated folks during the last 12 to 15 months are going to launch that relationship for a long time.
It's almost as if you established a relationship through this time, and it's going to matter moving forward.
It might matter. Yeah, it might matter.
So this is going to be the fun, interesting trends that we've got going on. And we wanted to set the stage and spend most of the time on this kind of area. But we wanted to set the stage of what we're looking at in the financial services industry, especially because a lot of times we'll have conversations with the board talking about, the unemployment rates are so high and economies are struggling and things along that line. But it's not quite the case for the financial services industry because unemployment has remained pretty low. I think we got up to maybe 3.6%, somewhere right around there in the worst.
Peak.
Yeah, at the worst of this. Right now, we're hovering right around 3.1%. The other key to this piece is that hiring is up 3.4% month over month. That doesn't seem like a lot, but it is actually substantial. The big piece to this as well, and this is kind of why we talked about the Salesforce, why we talk about Facebooks and things along that line, is because IT and legal are essentially universally needed talents, and they're also increasing. And especially with this shift to digital, the shift to remote, you're going to need your IT individuals. We're going to be facing new legal and compliance issues, so the legal field is increasing as well. So making sure we're establishing some processes, policies, and procedures moving forward to, one, attract a full range of individuals, but also maintain our competitive stance and pulling quality IT individuals. And I mean, I think I priced 4 general counsel positions in the last month. So, and they said every time, we can't hire this. We can't hire this.
Oh, it's time for me to be offensive.
Oh, okay. I'll bring it on. I'm ready.
All right.
I got the mute ready.
What's worse than having one attorney on staff?
What's worse?
2.
Thank you very much. John will be here all week.
But when we look at especially on the legal side, the mitigating risk, the compliance, the risk assessments are going to be so huge. And as we bring that talent in, they don't get paid like credit union people.
Exactly.
And so it will be a challenge to integrate this stuff.
Yeah, from a compensation professional individual perspective, legal is very hard to price because if they are in a private practice, they have an opportunity cost loss of going into a corporate world or a credit union world. So, but the key also here is that all of these numbers are in extreme stark contrast to retail, which has gone down, or the hardest hits of like accommodation or recreation, which is down 47% from the year earlier pace. We've seen, and that's generally where we see that the big numbers of a national unemployment rate of 6.3%. So the boards will say, "Oh man, things are bad out there," but they're not so bad for financial institutions. So if you have a new branch coming in right up the road, and you guys have either not been hiring or kind of holding back on hiring or not offering incentive plans, you might be starting to lose some talent to that branch right up the road.
Yeah. So I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this, but Deloitte did a nice study recently that said, what's going to make the remote workforce sustainable. And I guarantee you every one of our clients had to deal with this. How are we going to collaborate? What's the software? and then just look down the list of what we need to do to make it successful. But the number one is how are we going to collaborate?
Collaboration is always going to be key, and it's going to be very tricky. But the thing is that it's just because it's new. We haven't done it this way before, so we're going to have to grow that skill set and find a way to really establish those connections.
Okay, so this is kind of a tutorial on how to read a survey. You ready for this?
I'm ready. I need to learn.
So look at this. If an employee worked 40 hours a week, 36% of employees rated themselves as high performers. 36%.
That makes sense.
No, absolutely not.
Absolutely.
But when they had some choice over where they worked, when they worked, how they worked, it moved up to 50%. And the big three drivers to move the needle to being a high performer, self-reported now, was location where you worked, schedule when you worked, and what you want to do. This so reminded me of Office Space, the movie. The two Bobs interviewing the young kid about, well, so tell me what you do here on a normal day. And he says, well, I'm only here for a paycheck. I try to do as little as possible. I come in at 9:15. Everybody's at the, water cooler. So I sneak in. And then, after I do some video games, I take a 2-hour lunch. And then they look at each other after this. And, I'm going, oh, I guess this guy's getting fired. He goes, this guy's a go-getter. We're not challenging him.
He's going places. Look at that. Look at the trouble he's gone through not to work. This guy's smart.
I just love the idea that we self-report that we're a high performer. Everybody gets a ribbon. I don't know. But the meat of what came out of the study that we reviewed here was the idea of if you can give some employees some autonomy, then you're going to get their best. But the challenge is we're in the retail environment. And if the doors are supposed to open at 8 or 9, this guy can't come in at 9:15 and serve people. So it's that balance. So,
and we've seen different processes in place to be able to try to achieve some of that balance. One of the simplest ones is that open to appointment. It doesn't fix everything, but it does give us a different perspective to be able to manage that retail environment as well, to a certain degree.
Are you ready to declare you're a high performer?
I'm always a high performer.
I'm going with that.
I'm checking that box straight down, 5s down the line.
I don't know.
Watch when the surveys come back. You'll see that I am the high performer.
Okay. That's very true. So, and not to make light of this, I think what we're seeing now is just an update in mental health issues. My oldest daughter is a psychiatrist, and she said over the holidays, literally parents were dropping off their kids because, they're not at school, they're not with their social network, they're at home, it's very tense. And you think, then let's say, a 20-something's living with their parents and they're working for you, how tense can that be? So please keep your eyes and ears open for those warning signs to make sure that, we reach out to them and they have their social network and not trying to be friends with everybody, but just know that, that part of their life can be fulfilling and obviously that helps the membership if they're on top of their game.
I think you make a really good point there. It's not trying to be friends with everybody. It's just having an understanding of human beings, connect with a human being, make sure that they're okay.
And again, look at that third bullet. Top phrases to brighten your day. I appreciate your help. Thank you. It's so nice of you.
These are almost straightforward, John.
Yeah, but people don't do them. You read that book, Management by Walking Around, and you're supposed to say, hey, good job, good job. It's a good job for what, right? You've talked about that.
Absolutely, multiple times. I mean, the power of praise is a huge thing. And a lot of leaders, they have a hard time kind of grasping that because it's a little fuzzy. It's sunshine and rainbows kind of thing. We're talking about type A personalities. But when you give somebody clear direction on here's what you did, here's how that made me as your manager feel, here's what I would like to see again. You just use the word saying, I really appreciate you putting a lot of time into that. It puts in the fact that, okay, they appreciate the time that I put into that. And then leave them with a vision. Thank you very much for all the time that you put into that. It really helps the team. Thank you so much for that. It makes me feel great to see that level of dedication. It takes you 10 seconds. It costs you nothing. And it gives people a lot more than just the espresso shot of a good feeling.
And then the idea when go back to March and April and May when we had so many unknowns, people can pick up on the visual cues. You're an executive walking through the office with your head down.
A sad Charlie Brown walk.
Or throwing stuff. One of the two.
There's two spectrums here.
Yeah, so do I hunker down and not get noticed, or do I want the person to say, hey, thanks for chipping in, or moving from home or coming in or whatever it was, and those types of things. So, okay, we wanted to talk about geography and pay because this is just a huge topic that we're all going to have to deal with. I need to disclose, when I was 17, a freshman at the University of Tulsa, and I was taking macroeconomics, my professor was a Marxist.
Aha.
And I learned macroeconomics from a Marxist textbook. So like when we looked at elasticity of demand, I had to include the impact of the oppression of the masses.
As you do. I mean, you've got to calculate for those kind of things,
So
John.
I started behind the 8 ball in a lot of this stuff because of this professor. But this idea of cost of living versus cost of labor is something that we really got to get our hands on because, okay, so the high-tech world, Silicon Valley, Pacific Northwest, Facebook in particular, got really high praise for, hey, you can work from wherever you want to work. You want to work in Idaho, work in Idaho. You want to work, in a tent, a yurt, in Colorado, great. And they assumed people were going to take less money for that because it was going to be a cheaper cost of
You know
living.
what you
Right?
get when you assume, John?
Yeah, you hit the button now.
Mute. All right.
But what happened? They're getting employees pushing back, say, well, yeah, I want my Seattle dollars, but I want to spend them in Idaho.
Mm-hmm.
So there's a difference between cost of labor and cost of a living.
Yeah.
So you take a couple markets like Austin, college town, tons of PhDs that haven't been fulfilled at serving as waiters. You have a huge service sector if you want to tap in, and they're highly intellectual. They're highly motivated. They love cooperative. They're great. They're great employees. But if you're trying to hire an IT programmer or engineering to work with your core software, good luck.
Mm-hmm.
Every lousy company that's in the Silicon Valley is there. So the cost of labor for technology is California prices or, West Coast prices, whereas retail can be some of the most, reasonable in the country. So be careful about those types of mixes, not mixing those terms, because the idea is that, take Hawaii, one of the most expensive places to live in the United States, yet its labor force is pretty reasonable.
Mm-hmm.
Somehow that's not depressed, but it's not commensurate what it costs because local folks in Hawaii have adapted. They don't have to go buy the new house because they're living with relatives or, they've inherited a house where, you just, at 21 going to go out on your own and get a big house like you might do someplace else. So be careful of that. And I love this quote, picking on Facebook today, I guess, is just saying is just because Facebook's doing it doesn't mean we all have to do it, which is, pretty good, but pretty good idea.
I mean, we've talked about that a couple times by saying, we say, oh, industry best practices. Well, best practices for who?
Yeah.
How do we balance those between? So making sure that it works for your organization, works for your area. And I think you couldn't have hit a more important point of separating out that cost of living versus that cost of labor. Understanding the market that you're in on that level, it's going to be extremely important moving forward.
We used to get like onesie twosie questions a year, like, hey, we've got this great IT person, they want to move to Colorado, what should we pay them? And the old answer would be they can live wherever they want, but keep the salary structure intact because there's internal equity, there's perceived equity. I want to feel like we're playing favorites, but it's been more frequent.
Yep.
And then you think about it, well, if they're willing to take a cut in pay, great. But conversely, well, what happens if they want to move to San Francisco? I will need a 20% raise because I'm living in a very expensive place. So it's working both ways. So, but we got to be prepared to look at how we're going to deal with comp in the future, because I think that is kind of the wave of the future.
Absolutely. And I don't think there's going to be a true right answer when it comes down to it. And that's kind of the hard piece of this. We have to take every situation into consideration, and depending on the compensation philosophy that you've put in place, choose a direction, stay the course, and make sure that it's easy. Well, I like your whole concept. It's got to be effective. It's got to be efficient. It's got to be easy to administrate.
And we're definitely on the side of let's make this practical.
Yep.
Because if you were to technically do it, you would look at your home base, wherever your headquarters is, and you would look at every city pair in the United States, and you're going to have a different cost of living difference on the pay structure for that. That's ambitious and probably not worth anybody's time, right? But if you say, hey, I want a few tiers, high or low, that might be more reasonable. And that's what we're working with on clients, is to look at it that way. But look at this list. What are you going to put? What value are you going to put on culture versus cost saving? This is not the place to save a couple $1,000s because somebody wants to go a low income. Is it going to impact our culture? Okay, there's technical tools to do it, It's just be careful with the tools. They might not be applicable to your culture. And so, why risk, all the time trying to be fair to all these city pairs when your message should be is we're pay for performance. We want to be competitive with the market. We want you to be the best paid in the industry when you're the best performers. Those are the themes that resonate well with our employees. Not that, well, why is that city pair 0.25% more than my city pair, which is what it can end up being. And remember, that culture of how we treat those employees impacts every part of the business, right? So if we protect it, that should be our top concern. So it's not one decision, it's multiple interactions. So when we look at kind of the list of things, when we look at location-based structures, you got to weigh the cost of losing the person, because in the old days we'd say, no, the pay is the pay. We're not going to make any adjustments. And then we lose people, and then you go, okay, well, maybe that's not so good, because how long does it take to ramp up to get somebody hired, understand our culture, integrate with the other departments, and then there's a cost for it. So this third bullet here is like, if you risked a $120,000 job, moved it to 105, and then the person's not happy with that, was it worth risking 15 grand of cost savings to mess with the culture? And we're just going to have to do a lot more with it. So we're going to give you a strategy of how we think it should be done.
Yeah, and understanding that the age-old kind of thing of if you lose an individual, it's going to be about 2 times their salary. So you have to bake that into the fact of, is that $15K worth it?
If onboarding is done the way it used to, you don't even know if onboarding can be done in the same.
That's very true as well.
Do you know how many meetings I've had in the last 60 days where it'll be like 2 HR people in the room and they've never met? Like, hey, I want you to introduce our new guy. He's great. He's got this. Here's his pedigree, and wow, cool guy. Have y'all met? No. Okay. But we've hired him, and we're on
everything
fire.
is going great.
It's going great. Yeah.
So it's kind of time to transition to. We need to establish the long-term game plan. For the most part, we've kind of dabbled back and forth, going, okay, things are going to get back to the way they were. Maybe it's time to really focus on, okay, how things are now, and let's move forward and how we can transition from where we are now to something better in the future. And I always joke, and John hates this one by now, I'm sure, is that, there's 2 things that people hate. It's change and the way things are. And so we're stuck in that situation that, we've got a lot of things the way they are, and we've got a lot of change happening at the same time. So make sure that you're developing long-term remote working policies. Understand what that means, that if a person is going to be established out, it's going to be going long, make sure there's some consistencies there. The 1-offs and 2-offs, they're happening now, but I think we're going to see a lot more of that happening soon.
That's where you spend the bandwidth.
Yeah.
Is saying, how do we put a structure? Because, if I go back 20 years, some of the questions I would have got back then were, so-and-so's retiring. Are we supposed to pay their benefits?
Yeah.
Or, do you do anything? And this was before we had supplemental retirement plans and people were really out of whack with retirement. But, even somebody in a branch they didn't know what to do. Why? Never happened before. And it became these one-off decisions. And if you made a very expensive one-off decision and then that became a precedent, guess what? You're kind of hamstrung that you've got that commitment. So I think we're at one of those decision points now, right? Is these one-offs are going to become more frequent you're going to start getting these questions on your employee engagement surveys is what can we do this? And you're going to have answers.
Mm-hmm. I think you're exactly right on that because, hey, Bob over there got to do this. Can I do that? And that was kind of the big fear in the beginning of saying, well, we can't do this because then we got to do it for everyone. So establishing a policy and a plan in place and putting something in place is definitely going to be a necessity.
Again, I can't stress enough that this is great strategic planning topics to share with your board of we want to walk the walk of delivering great service. We want a great culture. We want the best employees. We want to be employer of choice. The definition of employer of choice is going to morph into this flexibility, and we're going to have to be prepared for it.
So, and it also comes down to the training. I mean, again, what John has constantly said is making sure that people are prepared and ready to be able to work remotely because it is a new skill for a lot of people. And it's a new skill for a lot of managers to manage a remote workforce, but it's certainly possible.
So kind of wrap up the day with just like a quick little 4-step exercise you could do is if you want to consider this is step 1, when you look at a strategy on a remote workforce, look at both cost of labor, cost of living, and then figure out what you want to do. And I used the example of Hawaii earlier, but every town has that situation as where they are relative to their workforce. Jeff, like other areas, like you came from North Carolina, so the high tech triangle, research triangle.
The research triangle. So it's just a conglomeration of a massive amount of high tech individuals.
And our clients, tons of university, tons of young folks, tons of retail potential. Yet we spend most of our time on software engineers, risk managers, mortgage folks, processors, because it's a huge banking
hub. Yeah,
hub, right? So it's this Venn diagram of shortage of labor, high demand, and high paid demand, and how do we deal with it? So
you also have multiple colleges in the area as well.
Well, that's what I was meaning by there's a ton of retail potential because we can use it. So the next thing is, like, if an employee relocates from a high to low or low to high, what are we how are we gonna define what action triggers a move? Okay, and then that one, we think, first of all, don't do city pairs. Don't do Cleveland to Chicago and then Cleveland to Omaha, Cleveland to New Orleans. Wherever you're located, that's the anchor. Okay. So
I mean, I came from a top 15 financial institution, 36,000+ employees, nationwide footprint. We had four different.
You're not getting a raise. Is this your resume?
I'm trying. Always try. Are we negotiating?
Well,
always negotiating.
Sound like you're. But yeah, your point of your story is yes.
We only had four different locations there, red, green, blue, and that basically what it came down to. So we didn't have to do city pairs, back and forth, that kind of stuff.
Yeah. So instead of looking at city pairs, anchor where your office is or your headquarters are, and then maybe 2 up and 2 down. And the rule of thumb I'm using right now is I'm not adjusting anybody more than 10 to 12.5% above the local market. Are there people violating that on the bell curves, 2 standard deviations away from your market? Absolutely. But I'm going to worry about culture or protect your culture by saying this is reasonable. And if you're making this accommodation, there's got to be an accommodation too. So think about anchoring that's the 100% index, and then do any cost of living that's less than 5%, maybe put them in there, and it's over 10, they go into that second tier. And then I really hate going 2 tiers below. Maybe just 1 tier, but it just depends on where you are. I mean, if you're in a higher, if you're in the San Francisco's,
there's certain situations that we have to consider.
Too. Yeah, but I'm trying to balance the accommodation for the employee to be responsive to their need, but also making it pragmatic.
Yeah.
So we're starting to do a lot of work. If you want to talk more about that offline, we're happy to do that. But want to get you out of here today and
we have, let's see, we have one question to be able to go through, and it's in reference back to slide 12. We're looking at the 16-minute drive versus the 27-minute drive. What's that? Let's see, what is the 16-minute versus the 27-minute reference?
Oh, okay. So they asked consumers, how far are you willing to drive to call that convenient to conduct financial services business? So it used to be 16, but during the pandemic, it's moved to 27 minutes, which is counterintuitive if we're supposed to be fast and quick. But people are saying because of the new normal, 27 is okay.
Yeah, they accept that understanding. Yeah. There might be a branch that's closed and might be a branch that's not open. They have to skip over that one.
That's the exact point. Is like, you're making a decision of how you want to keep people safe, and do you want to keep all your branches open? That was kind of a rule of thumb to say, if draw a circle. If I could accommodate more potential members or existing members within that circle, maybe it helps me make a decision on who stays open, who stays closed.
Absolutely.
So sorry for that. That's my fault for not explaining that well.
Okay, if there's any other questions, go ahead and pop those in now. But yes, the other questions are the slides going to be available? John says, no, we're not doing the slides. If you want to go ahead and email me at jeff@dhilton.com, just ask for the slides. I'll go ahead and send those to you after the broadcast. Might take me a little bit, but I'll get them to you. But other than that, like I said, on the other side of things, that we will have a survey that's going to be coming out. Please go ahead and take a moment to fill that out. Let us know how we're doing, how things are going. Anything else, John?
Yeah. We share the gospel. We want you to get this information out to your volunteers and to your staff. Remember, our mission at D. Hilton is to do this balance. We want you to have great information to make decisions, but we also want you to make practical decisions. We will never let you be bleeding edge. But, and that's why we like to bring in all these resources and ideas from other industries, because some work and some are like, that's not us. But again, we really appreciate the time that's spending with us today. At the end of the month, we'll probably have an invite going out tomorrow or Monday.
Should be right around the corner.
Yeah. So we're going to really look at employee recognition programs that we saw that did a nice, Crayons that did a nice job with recognition coming out of this pandemic. And then also looking at how do we look at remote employees? Again, some of that mental health issue, some of that engagement, some of that camaraderie, because it's all about keeping that culture.
Absolutely.
So that's what's next on our agenda.
All right, guys. Thank you so much for the opportunity. John, thank you so much for the time. We really do sincerely appreciate it. Again, we have recorded this webinar, so we'll be posting it on our website in about 3 to 5 days. So if you missed anything or would like to watch anything again, or if you've missed any of the past webinars, those are located there as well.
And if you'd like a Marxist textbook, I think you can get that.
I know a man.
I know a man.
Got a guy on the inside here.
Yeah.
We're going to talk about that more. That's got to be an interesting subject to go through there. All right, guys. Thank you so much. We really do sincerely appreciate it. If you have any questions, please don't hesitate to reach out to us. We're more than happy to have a conversation offline about these.
Stay safe.
Stay safe. Yeah. Oh, wow. We are right on time. Thank you so much, guys. Bye-bye.